The Vidian ambassador laughed as he mocked Earth's defenses, not knowing humanity's secret fleet was poised to wipe that smug grin off his fucking face. Your puny ships and primitive weapons are no match for the Kazthari, Xander sneered, leaning back in his chair. The Vidian consortium has been arming them for years. They will crush your pathetic colonies and feast on your bones. Captain Joshua Hunter gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He glared at the arrogant alien, barely restraining the urge to reach across and throttle him. You're making a big mistake, Xander. When the Kazthari are done with us, they'll come for you next, and we won't be there to help. Xander waved a dismissive tentacle. By the time they finish you off, we'll have stripped your planet bare. Your resources will make us unstoppable. Joshua shot to his feet. This isn't over. Humanity won't go down without a fight. As he stormed out of the meeting room, his wrist computer beeped urgently. Joshua's blood ran cold as he read the message from UEDF Command. A massive Kazthari fleet had just entered the solar system, armed to the teeth with Vidian weapons. They were heading straight for Earth, ready to burn it to ashes. Humanity's darkest hour had arrived, but little did the aliens know Earth had an ace up its sleeve. A secret fleet of devastating warships hidden in the asteroid belt, ships that would make the aliens tremble. It was time to show the galaxy what happens when you backed mankind into a corner. It was time to unleash hellfire. Joshua sprinted down the hallway, ignoring the startled looks from UEDF personnel as he barreled toward the command center. He burst through the doors, finding Admiral Catherine Novak and the other top brass huddled around a holographic display. Captain Hunter, I'm glad you're here, Novak said, her face grim. We have a situation. Novak nodded. And they're not alone. The Vidians have been supplying them with advanced weapons and technology. Joshua's eyes widened. How the hell are we supposed to stop them? Joshua stared in awe. How? We've been working on this in secret for years, Novak explained. Reverse engineering Kazthari tech, developing new weapons powered by dark matter. This fleet is our ace in the hole. Where are they? Joshua asked, still trying to process what he was seeing. Hidden in a cloaked space station near the edge of the system, and now it's time to bring them out of the shadows. Novak turned to face Joshua fully. I want you to take command of the flagship, the UEDF Retribution. Lead the Shadow Armada against the Kazthari. Show them what happens when they mess with humanity. Joshua straightened, a fierce determination burning in his chest. Yes, ma'am. As he turned to leave, an officer called out from across the room. Admiral, we're receiving reports from Earth, the Kazthari. They've begun orbital bombardment. The room fell silent. Joshua's heart clenched as he pictured the destruction raining down on his homeworld, the lives being snuffed out in an instant. Major cities are being hit. Millions are already dead. Joshua's hands curled into fists at his sides. White-hot rage coursed through his veins. They'll pay, he growled. For every single human life they've taken, they'll pay in blood. Novak placed a hand on his shoulder. Then let's not waste any more time. Get to the Retribution. We'll send you the coordinates for the Shadow Armada's location. Joshua nodded curtly and strode out of the command center, his mind already racing with plans and strategies. He gathered his crew and boarded a shuttle, rocketing off towards the hidden space station. As they approached the cloaked base, Joshua's breath caught in his throat. The Shadow Armada hung in space like a swarm of deadly insects, their black hulls bristling with advanced weaponry. The Retribution itself was a behemoth, dwarfing the other ships with its sheer size and power. Joshua took his place on the bridge, his crew moving efficiently around him as they prepared for battle. The fleet powered up their engines, the hum of dark matter reactors filling the air. Set a course for Earth, Joshua commanded, his voice steady and cold as ice. It's time to take back our home. The Shadow Armada surged forward as one, an unstoppable force driven by rage and the unbreakable will of humanity. Joshua stared out at the stars streaking past, his jaw set with iron determination. The Kazthari had no idea what was coming for them, but they were about to find out. The Shadow Armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's orbit, weapons charged and ready for battle. On the bridge of the Retribution, Joshua gripped the arms of his command chair as the tactical display lit up with contacts. Multiple Kazthari signatures detected, the sensor officer reported. They're moving to intercept. On screen, Joshua ordered, his eyes narrowing as the enemy fleet materialized before them. At its center was a massive dreadnought, bristling with Vidayan-made cannons and shielding. Magnify on the lead ship. The view screen zoomed in on the dreadnought's bridge, revealing a scarred and battle-hardened Kazthari warlord. Joshua recognized him instantly. Zekrath, a sadistic tactician known for his cruelty and ruthlessness. Zekrath, Joshua growled, his hands tightening on the armrests. I should have known he'd be leading this attack. The Kazthari fleet opened fire, their weapons slamming into the Shadow Armada's shields. The human ships returned fire, their dark matter cannons tearing through the enemy's defenses. Joshua leaned forward in his seat. Helm, take us into the heart of their formation. We're going after Zekrath's flagship. The Retribution surged forward, its engines flaring as it plunged into the midst of the Kazthari fleet. Enemy ships swarmed around them like angry hornets, their weapons pounding against the Retribution's shields. Target the dreadnought's shield generators and weapon systems, Joshua commanded, his eyes locked on the massive enemy ship. Fire at will. The Retribution's cannons roared to life, dark matter projectiles ripping through the dreadnought's shields and hull plating. Explosions blossomed across the Kazthari ship's surface as the Retribution poured fire into its critical systems. But the dreadnought was far from defenseless. It returned fire with a vengeance, its Vidian-enhanced weapons carving deep gashes into the Retribution's armor. Joshua was thrown from his chair as the ship shuddered under the onslaught, sparks and smoke filling the bridge. "Damage report," he shouted, pulling himself back to his feet. Joshua slammed his fist against the arm of his chair. The Retribution was dead in space, helpless before the might of the Kazthari dreadnought. Alarms blared throughout the ship as boarding craft latched onto the Retribution's hull, disgorging hordes of heavily armed Kazthari warriors. Joshua drew his sidearm and rallied his crew, determined to make their last stand a costly one for the enemy. "This is it, people," he shouted over the chaos. "We may be going down, but we're taking as many of these bastards with us as we can." The crew of the Retribution fought with the desperate fury of the doomed, their weapons cutting down Kazthari after Kazthari as the enemy swarmed through the ship's corridors. Joshua was in the thick of it, his gun blazing as he led a fighting retreat towards the bridge. But even as they fell back, Joshua knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. The Kazthari were simply too many, and the Retribution too badly damaged to hold out for long. Just as all seemed lost, a new wave of contacts appeared on the tactical display. Joshua stared in disbelief as a second human fleet emerged from hyperspace, their ships sleek and lethal. It was the United Earth Alliance, a rival faction that had long refused to join forces with the UEDF. "This is Admiral Marcus Dante of the UEA," a voice crackled over the comms. "Looks like you could use a hand, Captain Hunter." The UEA fleet opened fire on the Kazthari, their weapons cutting through the enemy ships like a hot knife through butter. The Kazthari, caught off guard by this unexpected reinforcement, began to retreat, their ships breaking formation and fleeing back towards the edge of the system. Joshua let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know what had brought the UEA to their aid, but he was grateful for their assistance. As the last of the Kazthari ships vanished into hyperspace, Joshua turned to face Admiral Dante's image on the view screen. There was much to discuss and many questions to be answered, but for now, Earth was safe. The two human fleets, once bitter rivals, had come together in humanity's darkest hour to turn back the alien tide. As the dust settled from the fierce battle, Joshua and Admiral Dante stood on the bridge of the Retribution, surveying the damage. The once proud ship was battered and scarred, a testament to the brutal fight they had just endured. We can't keep going on like this, Joshua said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The Kazathari are too strong. We need to work together if we're going to have any chance of winning this war. Dante nodded, his face grim. You're right. It's time we put aside our differences and focus on the real enemy. The two men shook hands, a truce forged in the heat of battle. They turned their attention to the tactical display, studying the latest intelligence reports. Our scouts have detected a large Kazathari base on Mars, Dante said, pointing to a blinking red light on the holographic map. It looks like they're using it as a staging ground for their invasion of Earth. Joshua's eyes narrowed. Then that's our next target. We need to hit them hard and fast before they have a chance to launch another attack. The two admirals quickly devised a plan, pooling their resources and manpower. Within hours, a combined fleet of UEDF and UEA ships was en route to Mars, ready to strike at the heart of the Kazathari war machine. But as they approached the Red Planet, a new threat emerged from the shadows. A group of Vidian warships, their hulls gleaming with advanced weaponry, dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of the human fleet. "Oncoming fire," the tactical officer shouted, as the Vidian ships opened fire, their weapons tearing through the human shields like paper. Joshua gritted his teeth as the Retribution shuddered under the onslaught. "Return fire. Target their weapons systems and engines." The space around Mars erupted into a maelstrom of fire and debris as the three fleets clashed. Human, Kazathari, and Vidian ships weaving in and out of formation in a deadly dance. Joshua and Dante led their ships into the heart of the battle, their weapons blazing as they fought to punch through the enemy lines. The Retribution and Dante's flagship, the UEA Victorious, worked in tandem, their combined firepower tearing gaping holes in the Vidian defenses. Explosions blossomed across the hulls of enemy ships as the human fleet pressed their advantage, driving a wedge through the Vidian formation. But the victory was hard won, and the toll was high. Nearly a third of the human ships were lost in the initial engagement, their crews sacrificing their lives to buy their comrades a chance at victory. As the battle raged on, Joshua received a garbled transmission from the surface of Mars. A team of UEDF Marines had managed to establish a beachhead near the Kazathari base, but they were heavily outnumbered and outgunned. "We need reinforcements," the Marine commander shouted over the sound of gunfire and explosions. "We can't hold out much longer." Joshua turned to Dante, his face set with determination. "I'm going down there. Our troops need support." Dante nodded. "I'll keep the pressure on up here. Give 'em hell, Hunter." Joshua gathered a strike team of his best soldiers and boarded a dropship, rocketing down towards the surface of Mars. As they approached the Kazathari base, they could see the flashes of weapons fire and the smoke rising from the battlefield. The dropship touched down in a swirl of red dust, and Joshua led his team out onto the Martian surface. The Kazathari base loomed before them, a massive fortification bristling with weapons emplacements and defensive barriers. Joshua and his soldiers charged forward, their weapons spitting fire as they engaged the Kazathari defenders. The fighting was brutal and bloody, a close-quarters battle fought in the narrow corridors and cramped rooms of the enemy base. Joshua ducked behind a shattered wall as a hail of plasma bolts sizzled past his head. He popped up and returned fire, his rifle barking as he put a burst of rounds into a Kazathari warrior's chest. All around him, his soldiers were locked in desperate combat with the aliens, their faces streaked with sweat and grime as they fought to push deeper into the base. The ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, human and Kazathari alike. As the battle raged on, Joshua received a panicked transmission from the Retribution. "Captain, we've got incoming. A massive Kazathari fleet just dropped out of hyperspace, and they're heading straight for Mars." Joshua's blood ran cold. If those reinforcements reached the planet, they would be able to overwhelm the human forces and turn the tide of the battle. He keyed his comm, his voice urgent. "Admiral Dante, we need to stop that fleet before it reaches Mars. Can you buy us some time?" There was a crackle of static. Then Dante's voice filled the channel. We'll do what we can, Joshua, but you need to hurry. I don't know how long we can hold them off. Joshua gripped his rifle tighter, his jaw set with determination. They had to take out this base and get back to the fleet before it was too late. The fate of the entire war hung in the balance. He turned to his soldiers, his eyes blazing with fierce resolve. You heard the man. We don't have much time. Let's finish this. With a roar of defiance, Joshua led his team deeper into the Kazthari stronghold, ready to fight to the last breath to save their homeworld. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, and they would not fail. The sound of gunfire and explosions echoed through the Martian landscape as the battle raged on, a desperate struggle for survival against an implacable alien foe. Joshua and his soldiers fought with everything they had, driven by the knowledge that the future of their species hung in the balance. They pushed deeper into the Kazthari base room by room, corridor by corridor, leaving a trail of fallen enemies in their wake. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the coppery tang of blood, a grim reminder of the price they were paying for every inch of ground they gained. Joshua took point, his rifle at the ready as he led his team towards the heart of the enemy stronghold. They encountered fierce resistance at every turn, the Kazthari warriors fighting with a desperate fury born of the knowledge that they were cornered and outnumbered. But the human soldiers were just as determined, driven by the memory of the millions who had died in the initial attack on Earth. They fought with a savage intensity, their weapons flashing in the dim light of the alien base as they cut down their foes. As they neared the central command center, Joshua's comm crackled to life once again. It was Dante, his voice strained and urgent. Joshua, we can't hold them off much longer. The Kazthari reinforcements are breaking through our lines. You need to get out of there now. Joshua gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he weighed his options. They were so close to their objective, so close to striking a decisive blow against the enemy. But if they didn't pull back now, they risked being cut off and overwhelmed by the incoming Kazthari fleet. He made his decision in a split second, his voice ringing out over the chaos of the battle. All units fall back to the extraction point. We're getting out of here. Joshua stayed at the rear of the formation, his rifle blazing as he held off the pursuing aliens. He could hear the sound of the dropship's engines growing louder as they neared the extraction point, a promise of safety and escape. But even as they reached the waiting dropship, Joshua knew that their mission was far from over. The Kazthari base on Mars had been a vital target, but it was just one small part of a much larger war. As he climbed aboard the dropship, his soldiers piling in behind him, Joshua's mind was already racing ahead to the next battle, the next challenge that lay ahead. The Kazthari reinforcements were still out there, a looming threat that could spell doom for the human fleet, and for Earth itself. They had bought themselves some time, but the war was far from won. Joshua knew that they would have to fight harder and smarter than ever before if they were going to have any hope of victory. As the dropship lifted off from the Martian surface, Joshua stared out at the blasted landscape below, his heart heavy with the weight of the losses they had suffered. But even in the midst of the destruction and the death, he could feel a flicker of hope burning within him. They had struck a blow against the Kazthari today, and they would strike again and again until the alien threat was finally vanquished. The human spirit was indomitable, and as long as there were still those willing to fight and die for their species, there was still a chance for victory. Joshua leaned back in his seat, his eyes drifting closed as the exhaustion of the battle finally caught up with him. But even as he slipped into a fitful sleep, his mind was already turning towards the future, towards the next battle and the next challenge that lay ahead. They had a long road ahead of them, but they would not rest until Earth was safe, and the Kazthari were nothing more than a bitter memory. The war had only just begun, and Joshua and his soldiers would be there to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. As the dropship docked with the Retribution, Joshua strode onto the bridge, his face grim. Admiral Dante's holographic image flickered to life on the view screen. "The Kazthari reinforcements will be here in less than an hour," Dante said, his voice tight. "We need a plan, and fast." Joshua nodded, his mind racing. They were outgunned and outnumbered, and with the Kazathari bearing down on Mars, they had little time to act. Suddenly the comm crackled to life. "Captain Hunter, Admiral Dante, I have urgent information for you." The voice was unfamiliar, with a distinct Vidian accent. Joshua and Dante exchanged a glance. "Who is this?" Joshua demanded. "My name is Zoran," the voice replied. "I'm a Vidian scientist and I need your help." Zoran quickly explained that he had defected from the Vidian consortium, disgusted by their alliance with the Kazathari. He revealed that the Vidians had been developing a devastating weapon called the Quantum Singularity Cannon, capable of destroying entire planets. "They plan to use it on Earth if the Kazathari fail to conquer it," Zoran said, his voice urgent. "You must stop them." Joshua felt a chill run down his spine. The stakes had just gotten even higher. He turned to Dante, a plan forming in his mind. "We need to infiltrate the Vidian research facility and steal that cannon," he said. "It's our only chance to even the odds." Dante nodded, his jaw set. "I'll assemble a team of our best soldiers. We'll need stealth and speed to pull this off." Within minutes, Joshua and Dante had gathered a squad of elite troops, each one handpicked for their skills and experience. They boarded a stealth shuttle and set a course for Jupiter, where the Vidian facility was located. As they approached the massive gas giant, Joshua could see the research station orbiting one of its moons. It was a sprawling complex of gleaming metal and glowing lights, bristling with defenses. The shuttle docked with the station, and Joshua led his team inside, their weapons at the ready. They moved silently through the corridors, avoiding patrols of Vidian guards and security drones. Finally, they reached the control room housing the Quantum Singularity Cannon. Joshua and his soldiers burst inside, guns blazing, taking the Vidian scientists by surprise. In the center of the room stood a tall, spindly alien with pale blue skin and cold, calculating eyes. It was Dr. Zalax, the lead scientist behind the cannon's development. "So you're too late," Zalax sneered, his tentacles writhing. "The cannon is fully operational and ready to fire. Earth will burn, and the Vidian consortium will rise from its ashes." Joshua leveled his rifle at Zalax's head. "Not if we have anything to say about it." Suddenly alarms began to blare throughout the facility. The Kazathari ships had arrived, and they were closing in fast. "We need to move," Dante shouted, firing his weapon at the Vidian security forces pouring into the room. Joshua and his team fought their way through waves of enemies, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burning flesh. They reached the cannon's power core, a pulsing sphere of dark energy that thrummed with malevolent power. Joshua knew what he had to do. He primed a plasma grenade and hurled it at the core, then turned and ran, his team close behind. The explosion was deafening, a blinding flash of light that engulfed the entire facility. Joshua felt the heat searing his skin as he dove for cover, the shockwave slamming into him like a hammer blow. When the dust settled, the cannon was nothing more than a twisted wreck of molten metal. The Vidian facility was in ruins, and the Kazathari ships that had been closing in were caught in the blast, their hulls crumpling like tin cans. Joshua and his team staggered back to their shuttle, battered and bleeding but alive. They had struck a major blow against the Vidians and the Kazathari, but their victory was short-lived. As they rocketed away from Jupiter, a panicked transmission came through on the comm. "Captain Hunter, this is Colonel Ramirez on Mars. We're being overrun. The Kazathari reinforcements are too strong. We can't hold them off much longer." Joshua felt a sinking feeling in his gut. They had destroyed the Quantum Singularity Cannon, but the battle for Mars still hung in the balance. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white. They had won a small victory today, but the war was far from over. The fate of humanity still rested on a knife's edge, and Joshua knew that the hardest fighting was yet to come. Joshua clenched his jaw as the urgent message from Colonel Ramirez filled the Retribution's bridge. The Kazathari reinforcements were overwhelming their forces on Mars, and time was running out. He turned to Admiral Dante, his eyes hard. "We have to buy our people more time to evacuate." Dante nodded grimly. Agreed, but how? Joshua brought up a holographic display of the Martian battlefield. A massive, fortified structure dominated the landscape, bristling with weapons. There, the Kazthari Citadel. It's their command center. If we can take it out, it might be enough to turn the tide. A frontal assault would be suicide, Dante said, studying the fortress. Then we don't go in the front. Joshua zoomed in on a small access tunnel near the base of the citadel. We infiltrate with a strike team, fight our way to the command deck, and blow the whole thing to hell. Dante grinned fiercely. I like the way you think, Hunter. Let's do it. Within minutes, Joshua, Dante, and a hand-picked team of their best soldiers were speeding towards the Martian surface in a cloaked dropship. They touched down near the access tunnel, the red dust swirling around them as they leapt from the craft, weapons ready. The tunnel was dimly lit and eerily quiet as they crept forward, senses straining for any sign of the enemy. Suddenly, a horde of Kazthari warriors burst from the shadows, their shrieks echoing off the metal walls. Joshua and his team met them head-on, rifles blazing in the confined space. The air grew thick with the stench of blood and burnt flesh as they fought their way deeper into the citadel, leaving a trail of alien corpses in their wake. At last they reached the command deck. The doors slid open to reveal Warlord Zekrath himself, flanked by his elite guards. The Kazthari leader snarled at the sight of the humans, his eyes glinting with malice. "Who dare to challenge me in my own stronghold?" Zekrath hissed, drawing a wicked-looking blade. "I will take great pleasure in crushing you myself." Joshua stepped forward, his rifle raised. "Not today, you ugly bastard." The two warriors clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand battle, their weapons flashing in the dim light. Joshua ducked and weaved, using his speed and agility to stay one step ahead of Zekrath's brutal strength. But the Kazthari warlord was a cunning fighter. He feinted left, then lashed out with a vicious kick that caught Joshua in the ribs, sending him stumbling back. Zekrath pressed his advantage, his blade slicing through the air. Joshua managed to parry the blow at the last second, the force of the impact sending shockwaves up his arm. He counterattacked with a flurry of strikes, driving Zekrath back. The two warriors circled each other, panting and bloody. Joshua could hear the sounds of battle raging around him as his team fought off the Kazthari guards. "They'll fight well for a human," Zekrath sneered, "but it won't be enough. Even if you defeat me, you've already lost." "What are you talking about?" Joshua demanded. Zekrath laughed, a harsh grating sound. "We've planted fusion bombs beneath the surface of Mars. If you win this battle, they will detonate, shattering this pathetic planet and taking your forces with it." Joshua's blood ran cold. He lunged forward with a roar, his rifle forgotten as he grappled with Zekrath. The two warriors tumbled to the ground, trading blows with brutal force. With a final desperate effort, Joshua managed to wrap his hands around Zekrath's throat. He squeezed with all his strength, feeling the Kazthari's windpipe collapse beneath his fingers. Zekrath thrashed and gurgled, his eyes bulging. Then, with a final shudder, he went limp. Joshua staggered to his feet, his chest heaving. "Dante," he shouted, "we have to get our people off this planet now." Dante nodded, his face grim. "You heard the man," he barked to the strike team. "Move!" They raced back through the citadel, fighting off the remaining Kazthari forces as they went. Joshua keyed his comm, his voice urgent, as he hailed the retribution. "All UEDF and UEA forces evacuate immediately. The Kazthari have rigged Mars to blow. Get to your ships and clear the atmosphere now." The response was immediate. Dropships and shuttles filled the skies as the human forces scrambled to escape the doomed planet. Joshua and his team barely made it back to their own craft before the first explosions began to rock the surface. They blasted off, racing towards the stars as the ground crumbled and shattered beneath them. Joshua watched in horror as Mars began to break apart, massive fissures spreading across its surface as the fusion bombs detonated deep underground. The shockwave hit them like a hammer blow, sending their dropship tumbling end over end. Joshua gripped the armrests of his seat, his teeth gritted as he fought to keep the craft under control. Somehow, miraculously, They managed to clear the atmosphere just as Mars shattered completely, sending debris hurtling in all directions. Joshua could see the Kazathari fleet, caught in the blast, their ships crumpling and breaking apart like toys. But the Vidians were nowhere to be seen. They had slipped away in the chaos, escaping unscathed. Joshua and Dante regrouped with the remnants of their fleet in high orbit over Earth, the adrenaline of battle still coursing through their veins. They had won a costly victory, but the war was far from over. Suddenly a chilling message crackled over the comm. The Vidian leader, High Counselor Xandar, his voice dripping with menace. "Congratulations on your Pyrrhic victory, humans," Xandar sneered. "But you have forgotten one important detail. We have captured your precious Admiral Novak. Surrender now, or she will suffer the consequences of your defiance." Joshua and Dante exchanged a stunned look, their faces pale. The Vidians had played their trump card, and the fate of Earth itself now hung in the balance. Joshua's fists clenched as Xandar's chilling message echoed through the bridge. Novak, the woman who had been like a mother to him, was in the clutches of that Vidian bastard. Every instinct screamed at him to charge in, guns blazing, and tear the Vidian crucible apart until he found her. But he knew that would be suicide. The crucible was a fortress, bristling with weapons and shielded by an impenetrable energy field. A frontal assault would only get them all killed. "We need a plan," Joshua said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, "and we need it fast." They pored over the intel, searching for any weakness they could exploit. The crucible was located deep in the heart of a remote asteroid field, surrounded by a minefield of Vidian sensors and traps. But there was one glimmer of hope. The Retribution's spies had managed to steal a set of Vidian stealth codes, allowing them to slip past the ship's defenses undetected. "That's our way in," Joshua said, a plan forming in his mind. "We take a small team, infiltrate the crucible using the stealth codes, and find Novak." Dante frowned. "It's risky. If they detect us—" "They won't," Joshua said, his voice hard. "We'll be in and out before they even know we're there." He turned to the bridge crew. "Assemble a strike team, our best soldiers, the ones who can handle anything. We leave in 1 hour." As the crew scrambled to prepare, Joshua pulled Dante aside. "I need you to do something for me." Dante raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "I need you to lead an attack on the Vidian supply depot in the Zeta Quadrant. Hit them hard, and hit them fast. Cripple their ability to wage war." Dante's eyes widened. "A diversion." Joshua nodded. "Exactly. Draw their attention away from the crucible. Give us the time we need to get Novak out." Dante clasped Joshua's shoulder. "Consider it done." An hour later, Joshua and his team were speeding towards the crucible in a cloaked shuttle, the stolen stealth codes broadcasting from their ship. They drifted past the asteroid field, the ship's sensors showing no sign of detection. As they approached the crucible, Joshua's heart raced. This was it, the moment of truth. They docked with the prison ship, the airlock hissing open. Joshua and his team moved silently through the corridors, their weapons at the ready. Suddenly alarms blared through the ship. Vidian guards poured into the hallway, their weapons spitting plasma. He and his team opened fire, the air thick with the stench of ozone as they cut down the Vidian guards. They fought their way deeper into the ship, leaving a trail of mangled corpses in their wake. "Novak's cell should be just ahead," Joshua said, consulting the schematics on his wrist computer. "Let's move." They rounded the corner, only to find themselves face to face with a squad of heavily armed Vidian elites. The aliens opened fire, their weapons tearing through the air. Joshua dove for cover, his rifle blazing as he returned fire. The hallway became a kill zone, plasma bolts and shrapnel flying in all directions. One of Joshua's men fell, a smoking hole in his chest. Another took a shot to the leg, his scream echoing through the corridor. But Joshua and his team pushed forward, their determination fueled by the knowledge that Novak's life hung in the balance. They cut down the Vidian elites one by one, their weapons flashing in the dim light. At last they reached Novak's cell, But as they approached the door, Joshua's heart sank. The cell was protected by an advanced biometric lock, one that could only be opened by Xandar himself. Joshua slammed his fist against the wall in frustration. They were so close, but Novak might as well have been on the other side of the galaxy. Suddenly his comm crackled to life. It was Dante, his voice strained and breathless. "Joshua, we've engaged the Vidian fleet at the supply depot. Admiral Zarius is leading the defense. It's a tough fight, but we're holding our own." Joshua's mind raced. If Zarius was at the supply depot, that meant Xandar was vulnerable. "Dante, I need you to do something for me," Joshua said, a desperate plan forming in his mind. "I need you to send a message to Xandar. Tell him the Kazthari have surrendered, and they're willing to sign a peace treaty, but they'll only do it if Xandar himself comes to the Crucible to negotiate." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the comm. "Joshua, are you sure about this? If Xandar realizes it's a trap—" "He won't," Joshua said, his voice hard. "He's too arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable." Dante sighed. "All right, I'll send the message, but be careful, Joshua. Xandar is a snake. He won't go down easy." Joshua and his team took up positions around Novak's cell, their weapons trained on the door. They waited, the minutes ticking by like hours. Then the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. A squad of Vidian guards rounded the corner, led by a tall, spindly figure in ornate robes. The Vidian leader strode towards the cell, his face twisted in a sneer. "Where are the Kazthari delegates?" he demanded. "I was told they would be here to negotiate the surrender." Joshua stepped out from the shadows, his rifle leveled at Xandar's chest. "There are no Kazthari delegates," he said, his voice cold. "This is a trap, Xandar, and you walked right into it." He reached for his weapon, but Joshua was faster. He fired a single shot, the plasma bolt slamming into Xandar's shoulder and spinning him around. The Vidian guards opened fire, but Joshua and his team were ready. They cut down the guards in a hail of plasma, their bodies falling to the deck in smoking heaps. Joshua grabbed Xandar by the throat, slamming him against the cell door. "Open it," he growled, pressing his rifle against the Vidian's temple, "or I'll splatter your brains across the wall." Xandar hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth. Then, with a snarl of defeat, he placed his hand on the biometric scanner. The lock beeped and the cell door slid open. Admiral Novak stumbled out, her face pale and drawn. "Joshua?" she whispered, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Is it really you?" Joshua pulled her into a fierce hug, his eyes stinging with tears of relief. "It's me, Admiral. We're getting you out of here." He turned to his team. "Let's move. We're not out of this yet." They fought their way back to the shuttle, cutting down any Vidian who dared to stand in their way. As they reached the airlock, Joshua heard a massive explosion rock the ship. He turned to see Xandar, his face contorted with rage, standing at the end of the corridor. The Vidian leader held a detonator in his hand, his finger poised over the trigger. "If I can't have the Admiral," Xandar snarled, "then no one can." He pressed the button, and the world erupted in flames. The Crucible shuddered as explosions tore through its hull, the metal twisting and warping under the onslaught. Joshua and his team barely made it to the shuttle in time, the airlock sealing behind them, as they blasted away from the dying ship. As they rocketed away, Joshua watched in grim satisfaction as the Crucible exploded in a blinding flash of light, taking Xandar and a large portion of the Vidian fleet with it. They had struck a blow against the Vidians, but the war was far from over, and as Joshua looked into Novak's haunted eyes, he knew that the true cost of victory was yet to be tallied. In the aftermath of their daring rescue of Admiral Novak, Joshua and Dante pored over the intelligence they had gathered from the Vidian Crucible. One piece of information stood out like a beacon: the location of a massive Vidian shipyard and research facility, hidden away in the swirling depths of a nearby nebula. "This is it," Joshua said, his eyes narrowing as he studied the holographic display. "This is where they're building their new fleet, ships designed specifically to counter our technology." Dante nodded grimly. "We have to take it out. If those ships get deployed, we won't stand a chance. They quickly formulated a plan. Joshua would lead a team of infiltrators to sabotage the facility from within, while Dante engaged the defending Vidian fleet with the bulk of their forces. As they approached the nebula, the shipyard came into view, a sprawling complex of docks, hangars, and factories, protected by a swarm of Vidian warships. Joshua and his team boarded a stealth shuttle and slipped away from the main fleet, using the nebula's electromagnetic interference to mask their approach. They landed in a secluded corner of the shipyard, their weapons at the ready as they emerged into the dim industrial corridors. Joshua led the way, his eyes scanning for any sign of the enemy as they moved deeper into the facility. Suddenly, a group of Vidian guards rounded the corner, their weapons raised. Joshua and his team reacted instantly, their rifles barking as they cut down the aliens in a hail of plasma fire. They pushed forward, planting explosives at key structural points as they went. But as they entered the heart of the shipyard, they stumbled upon a horrifying discovery. In a hidden research lab, they found dozens of human prisoners, their bodies twisted and deformed by the Vidians' experiments. They had been used as test subjects for a new form of biological weapon, a virus designed to target human DNA. Joshua's vision went red with rage. He turned to his team, his voice shaking with fury. "Free the prisoners, and then we burn this place to the ground." As they worked to release the captives, Joshua set the final charges, a cold determination settling over him. The Vidians would pay for their crimes. Outside, the space around the shipyard erupted into chaos as Dante's fleet clashed with the Vidian defenders. The nebula lit up with the flashes of weapons fire and the glow of burning ships, the two sides locked in a brutal slugging match. The tide of battle seemed to be turning in the Vidians' favor, their superior numbers pressing Dante's forces back. But just as all seemed lost, Joshua and his team detonated their explosives. The shipyard shuddered as a chain reaction tore through its structure, explosions blossoming from deep within its core. The research labs, the factories, the docked ships, all were consumed in a hellish inferno of fire and shrapnel. The blast engulfed the nearby Vidian fleet, the shockwave shattering their formation. Dante seized the opportunity, rallying his ships for a final desperate push. They surged forward, their weapons blazing, driving the Vidians back in a full retreat. As the last of the enemy ships fled into the depths of space, Joshua and his team emerged from the smoldering ruins of the shipyard, the freed prisoners in tow. They had struck a decisive blow against the Vidian consortium, but the cost had been high. Joshua met Dante's gaze across the battlefield, a silent understanding passing between them. They had won the day, but the war was far from over. The Vidians would not forgive this defeat, and they would return, more determined than ever to crush humanity beneath their heel. But for now they had a moment to catch their breath, to tend to their wounds and honor their fallen comrades, and to plan for the battles still to come. As the dust settled from the devastating battle at the Vidian shipyard, Joshua and Dante took stock of their situation. The human fleet had struck a major blow against the enemy, but they knew the Vidians and Kazthari would be quick to retaliate. Suddenly, an urgent distress call crackled over the comm channels. It was from Proxima Centauri, a nearby human colony home to millions of civilians. A remnant of the Kazthari fleet had launched a surprise attack, catching the colony's defenses off guard. But there was more at stake than just the lives of the colonists. Proxima Centauri was also the site of a secret human research facility, where scientists were developing a prototype shield generator that could turn the tide of the war. If the Kazthari captured or destroyed the generator, it would be a devastating blow to humanity's chances of victory. Joshua and Dante knew they had to act fast. They quickly divided their forces, with Dante taking the bulk of the fleet to defend Proxima Centauri, while Joshua led a small strike team to secure the shield generator. As Dante's ships dropped out of hyperspace above Proxima Centauri, they were immediately met with a hail of fire from the Kazthari attackers. The alien ships were armed with advanced weaponry, and they tore into the human fleet with ruthless efficiency. On the surface of Proxima Centauri, Joshua and his team fought their way through the chaos of the Kazathari ground assault. The colony's streets were filled with the sounds of screams and gunfire as civilians fled in terror from the alien invaders. Joshua led his team towards the research facility, their weapons blazing as they cut down Kazathari warriors left and right. But as they neared the facility's entrance, they discovered a new threat. A group of Vidian special forces had already breached the facility's defenses, and they were fighting their way towards the shield generator. Joshua realized with a sinking feeling that the Vidians must have intercepted the distress call and seen an opportunity to steal the generator for themselves. "Double time it, people," Joshua shouted to his team. "We can't let the Vidians get their hands on that generator." They burst into the facility, engaging the Vidians in a brutal close-quarters battle. The air was filled with the stench of blood and burnt flesh as the two sides clashed, each determined to claim the prize. Joshua fought his way towards the generator room, his rifle blazing as he cut down Vidian after Vidian. He could hear the sounds of Dante's fleet battling the Kazathari in orbit, and he knew they were running out of time. As he reached the generator room, he found himself face to face with a Vidian commando, his weapon leveled at Joshua's chest. Joshua reacted on instinct, dropping to the ground and rolling to the side as the commando fired. The plasma bolt sizzled over Joshua's head, missing him by inches. He came up firing, his rounds stitching a line of holes across the Vidian's chest. The commando dropped to the ground, dead before he hit the floor. Joshua raced to the generator, his fingers flying over the controls as he worked to bring it online. The sounds of battle grew louder outside, and he knew the Kazathari were closing in. With a final keystroke, the generator hummed to life, its energy field expanding to envelop the entire colony. Just as the Kazathari ships opened fire from orbit, the shield snapped into place, deflecting their bombardment harmlessly into space. Joshua let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They had done it. The colony was safe, at least for now. But even as he savored the victory, he knew it had come at a heavy cost. Dante's fleet had taken severe losses in the battle, and countless civilians had been killed or wounded in the Kazathari attack. As Joshua and his team evacuated the research facility, he could see the toll the war was taking on his people. Their faces were haggard and haunted, their eyes hollow with the weight of all they had seen and done. But Joshua knew they couldn't stop fighting. Not now, not when they were so close to victory. The Vidians and the Kazathari would keep coming, keep attacking, until humanity was wiped from the galaxy. It was up to Joshua and his allies to make sure that never happened. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, they would keep fighting until the last alien invader was driven from human space. Joshua boarded a shuttle and headed back to the fleet, his mind already racing with plans for the next battle. The war was far from over, but with the shield generator in their hands, they had a new weapon to even the odds. And Joshua would make damn sure they used it to its full potential. The Vidians and the Kazathari had no idea what was coming for them. As the dust settled from the battle at Proxima Centauri, Joshua and Dante wasted no time in planning their next move. They gathered in the war room of the Retribution, poring over intelligence reports and tactical maps. Dante nodded, his face grim. "Agreed, but it won't be easy. They're sure to have some nasty surprises waiting for us." As if on cue, a lieutenant burst into the room, his face pale. "Sirs, we've just intercepted a Vidian transmission. You need to see this." He pulled up a holographic display, showing a massive spherical device bristling with weaponry. Joshua's blood ran cold as he realized what he was looking at. "Is that what I think it is?" Dante asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The lieutenant nodded. "A planet killer. The Vidians call it the Doomsday device. According to the transmission, it's capable of annihilating entire star systems." Joshua slammed his fist on the table, his eyes blazing with anger. "Where are they building it?" "On a remote planet, deep in Vidian space. It's heavily fortified, guarded by what's left of their fleet and a massive ground force." Joshua and Dante exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. This was it, the final battle, the one that would decide the fate of humanity. "Assemble the fleet," Joshua ordered, his voice ringing with authority. "Every ship, every soldier. We're going to hit that planet with everything we've got." Within hours, the combined human armada was underway, a massive force of ships and fighters, all united under one banner. They dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the Vidian system, their sensors immediately picking up the enemy fleet guarding the planet. "All ships, engage," Joshua commanded from the bridge of the Retribution. "Fighters, clear a path for the ground forces." The space around the planet erupted into a maelstrom of fire and death as the two fleets clashed. Vidian ships exploded under the onslaught of human weaponry, while human vessels shuddered and burned under the enemy's relentless barrage. Joshua and Dante led the charge, their ships carving a path through the enemy lines. They fought their way to the planet's surface, dodging anti-aircraft fire and orbital defenses. As the ground forces landed, they were immediately met with a hail of enemy fire. Vidian soldiers swarmed over the battlefield, their weapons spitting death. Joshua and Dante fought side by side, their weapons blazing as they cut down enemy after enemy. They pushed forward, inch by bloody inch, towards the massive fortress that housed the Doomsday device. As they neared the entrance, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Admiral Zarius, his face twisted with hate and rage. "You're too late," he snarled, leveling his weapon at Joshua. "The device is already active. In a matter of minutes, your precious Earth will be nothing but dust." Joshua and Dante charged forward, engaging Zarius and his elite guard in a brutal hand-to-hand battle. They fought with the strength of desperation, knowing that the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. In the chaos of the fight, Dante took a searing blast to the chest, the wound mortal. He collapsed to the ground, his life bleeding out onto the cold metal floor. Joshua let out a roar of anguish and redoubled his efforts, his blows fueled by rage and grief. He and Zarius traded blows, their weapons forgotten as they grappled with each other. Zarius thrashed and gurgled, his eyes bulging. Then with a final shudder he went limp. Joshua staggered to his feet, his chest heaving. He raced to the control room, his heart pounding as he saw the countdown ticking down on the Doomsday device's display. He keyed his comm, his voice ragged. "All units, evacuate immediately. The device is active and can't be stopped. Get clear of the planet now." As the human forces retreated, Joshua worked frantically at the controls, trying to find some way to stop the device, but it was no use. The countdown reached 0, and he closed his eyes, bracing for the end. In a blinding flash of light, the Doomsday device exploded, the shockwave obliterating the Vidian stronghold and the surrounding fleet. Joshua was consumed instantly, his body vaporized by the incredible heat and energy. From the bridge of the Retribution, Dante watched in horror as the planet was engulfed in a massive fireball. Tears streamed down his face as he realized that Joshua was gone, sacrificing himself to save humanity. The surviving human ships limped back to Earth, their hulls battered and scarred. They had won the war, but at a terrible cost. In the aftermath of the conflict, the alliance between the UEA and the UEDF began to unravel. Old rivalries and resentments bubbled to the surface, and the two factions found themselves increasingly at odds. Dante, haunted by the loss of his friend and the horrors he had witnessed, retired from active duty. He retreated to a small cabin in the mountains, seeking solace in isolation. But even as humanity struggled to rebuild and heal, the seeds of new conflicts were already being sown. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and there would always be those who sought to exploit its weaknesses. A year after the war's end, a memorial service was held for Joshua and the countless others who had given their lives in defense of Earth. Dante stood at the podium, his eyes hollow and haunted. "Joshua Hunter was a hero," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He gave his life so that we might live. We must honor his sacrifice by striving to be better, to build a future worthy of the price he paid." As the service ended, and the mourners began to disperse, Dante looked up at the stars, wondering what new challenges lay ahead. The war was over, But the struggle for survival never ended. Humanity would have to be ready for whatever came next. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.